Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Shane.
And this is the RPM podcast.
And welcome back to another race review. And today we'll be looking at the Sakhir. Is it Sakhir? Is that how you pronounce it?
Sakhir, yeah.
Sakhir. I've been calling it the outer ring for the last week, and I've received a little bit of feedback on Twitter that it's not the outer ring, it's not a ring, and it is the Sakhir Grand Prix. So we're going to be diving into the Grand Prix and what an emotional weekend it was again at Bahrain. But before we go into it, we've got some questions in our segment from View from the Stands. We've got a lot of questions this week, so we're going to do our best to get through them. As always, thank you very much for writing into us. We're generally overwhelmed when we get all these questions, and we love sharing your thoughts and opinions, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So the first one is from DMAC on YouTube. He left a comment, and he has asked, will Roman mostly be remembered for just his accidents at Spa 2012 and Bahrain 2020, given that Roman now won't be he won't be driving now, will he? He's back home with his family, and he will not be driving that in that Haas this year again. So what do you think, Alex?
Well, I did actually reply to this comment on YouTube. I did respond to DMAC and said we would pick it up here. I just touched on the fact that obviously he's a champion in junior categories. He won GP3 and GP3 Asia and GP2, I believe, as well. And he had 10 podiums for Lotus, I think.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah,
he had quite a few. So obviously he's got a good track record behind him. But even those that are aware of his racing record, like DMAC mentioned, that doesn't necessarily change the way that the public may perceive him. I would have thought, most people on the street would have never heard of Romain Grosjean until this incident. So it's likely that will stick in their minds. The way that I will remember Romain, though, most intensely is from the video of his interview where he talked about what happened after the crash. He talked about what happened when he was in the car and his immediate thoughts. And it's just an incredibly touching interview that he gave. And Romain Grosjean's a driver that's got a lot of stick in the past, and he's made mistakes. His career has had its peaks and troughs, but just like Kevin Magnussen said not long after, I think we all didn't realize just how much we love Romain Grosjean and how we would never want to see him hurt, and that's how I'll remember Romain.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that question can be answered in so many different ways, and I think it really depends on how long you've been watching the sport as a whole as well. If you've only tuned in this year, you probably haven't heard much of Romain Grosjean because he's been at the back of the field up until the Bahrain accident. But if you've been watching Formula One for the last 10, 15 years, then you would have seen his good days, his glory days, his bad races, and what comes and goes with every single racing driver. But I think what you said about that interview, that's how I'm going to remember him as a really good Formula One driver. Didn't always have the best car. Well, never really had the best car. He's been in the Haas, unfortunately, for the last couple of years. But his amazing interview, and it was just so heartfelt, and it was just warming to see him out and about, walking, giving interviews a week after that horrific accident. Those are the positive memories I will remember of Romain Grosjean.
Definitely. So we've got lots of questions, obviously, to do with Mercedes and Russell this weekend. No surprise there. Thanks so much for all of them. Let's start with a question from @yaboyweegee, who asks, do you guys think Mercedes will give Russell another chance in the W11 after this week's colossal F-up, as Toto Wolff put it, rather gracefully on live TV?
Came as a bit of a shock, didn't it?
It shows how annoyed he was. He didn't care. He was like, that's the way that it was, and for a team that is so dedicated to its perfectionism, it's understandable that they'll be frustrated with that. Now, as it currently stands, at time of recording, we don't know where the Hamilton's going to be actually at Abu Dhabi, and it doesn't seem, I don't know, I'm not sure how it looks actually. Some people say it doesn't seem likely.
Yeah, it's a hard one because Hamilton's stayed silent on social media for the last 5 days, which is really unusual for Hamilton on all accounts. He's usually quite verbal in the most positive ways. Not always in the past, but he's always been on social media. We haven't had an official update from the team. Apparently, he was obviously symptomatic with COVID-19 symptoms. I think Toto said he's taken a step in the right direction, and that's literally the only news we've got. Obviously, to leave the country, he's got there's various tests. He's got to test positive 4 times in a row to enter the paddock or, participate in a race. And there's different quarantine phases and periods for different countries. So it's a bit of a nightmare for the team, to be honest. It really depends on how Hamilton's feeling. And that's the only answer. I don't think it's a decision Mercedes will make. I think it's is Hamilton fit to race? Yes. Then Hamilton will race in the Mercedes. If Hamilton's not fit to race, then George will get that second chance next week.
Yeah,
or this
surely
week,
it'll be Russell.
I'm thinking it's heading towards that direction, but they didn't announce Russell until Thursday last week, so I can't imagine there'll be much confirmation until. I don't expect anything until Wednesday at the earliest, because before then, Hamilton could test negative 4 times and participate, so they've got to hold out until the tests are done. But thank you very much for your question. Moving on, we've got another question about George. Does George get disqualified like he technically should have for the mixed tyre set that he didn't get a puncture and wins the race? Nathan Reed thinks that the stewards did bend the rules a little bit because he was so far down the grid. So what's your thoughts on that, Alex? Should have George got disqualified given the mix up in tyre compounds? Well, not the tyre compounds, sorry. It was the tyre sets, wasn't it?
Yeah, so what happened, and we'll go over this in detail in the race discussion, is that he got Bottas's tyres on the front instead of his own set. And I believe they're part of the Parc Fermé rules because obviously they may have different tyre pressures, for example. So it's never happened before in Formula One. That rule has never been breached before in Formula One in regards to putting on the wrong person's tyres and then going out. That's what was in the stewards' report. They did recommend that the FIA change the rules because the 3-lap grace period that applies for putting on the mixed compounds does not apply to this rule.
Oh, I see.
So I think what happened is they realised that it was an unusual set of circumstances that had never happened before. Mercedes pitted immediately in order to rectify it, and that was the penalty, essentially. They were penalised by having to pit again. They had to do it. They knew they had to do it.
Yeah.
And they were also fined €20,000, which is a pretty pathetic amount considering it's one of the largest manufacturers in the world.
That's loose change.
I do wish they'd find them a reasonable amount. Like, what's €20,000 to a team that can spend 300, 400 million on a championship charge?
They probably spend that on a weekly budget on catering.
Yeah.
They've had people they have to feed and the amount of personnel. That's probably a week's budget for catering. Interesting rule. I'm sure it'll get picked up on the Sky Sports or on over Twitter, and the FIA or Formula One will do a piece on it and how it's potentially will change in the future.
Yeah, I think they will. I think they will change it because it does make sense for them to equalise those. They are very similar circumstances. If Russell had gone on to win the race and not got his puncture, I think that it probably would have played out much the same. They probably would have maybe given them a bigger fine. I don't think they would have punished him because, like I say, the punishment was that he had to pit again. That was the penalty. It was effectively a 20-second time penalty.
Yeah, of course. Which was,
and it's not like it was potentially dangerous.
Yeah. And 20-second time penalty or pissing at a track which is only 55 seconds long is a colossal loss. Whereas if you potentially had that same situation at Spa, you're only missing out on a third of the lap time, or not even that. It's a quarter of the lap time. So yeah, the damage was done, and I guess Mercedes was proactive and obviously tried to fix it as soon as possible, which is why the fine was the penalty and nothing else.
Moving on then, next one from @TheRealDS6 asks, why did they pick Russell over Van Dorn, really? Which suggests that there's some kind of secret reason why they might have done it. I don't know if there is necessarily. I mean, Van Dorn is a great driver, but Russell is, he's the future of the team, it seems, when either Hamilton or Bottas eventually, or Hamilton decides to sort of move on, or Bottas decides to move on or is forced to move on. So Russell seems like the obvious pick because, he's most likely to be in the car in the future. So it makes more sense to put him in over Van Dorn.
Yeah, there's nothing really else to add to that apart from, Russell has driven a Formula One car this year on every single race. So he's got some sort of experience. He's, there's the experience there, whereas Van Dorn hasn't stepped foot in a Formula One car this year. I can't remember the last time he has done. So the obvious choice would be Russell, especially he is as he is the future of the team. Moving on to the next one. This is a very interesting one, which has been a topic of discussion throughout my household as well. Has this hurt or helped Hamilton's contract negotiations with Mercedes? As initially, Russell was leading and is cheaper than Hamilton, but since the failure of the pit stops and strategy, would Hamilton have more or less leverage to negotiate his terms? Now, I'm going to start with this. I think it's a very, very interesting question. I'm glad you sent it in. I think if Hamilton hadn't got COVID, they'll be talking about their contract now. He's wrapped up the World Championship. They wrapped up the Constructors' Championship as well. So they were going to start negotiations. And given Hamilton's prestige, reputation in this sport, he's got all the balls in his court. He can name a figure and he almost guarantee or within reason that Mercedes will turn around and say, you know what, you've done so much for us. You are a fantastic driver. You've secured 6 championships with Mercedes. We'll pay it. And I'm not taking anything away from Hamilton here because, I'm a massive fan and, I'm British, support all British drivers like George Russell. George Russell stepped in that car now after 2 days of practice and a qualifying session. He led the majority of that race. And I know it's got a lot to do with the car. And obviously he is in one of the fastest cars on the grid. But he was faster than Bottas. He got him off the line, and we'll talk about how the ins and outs of Bottas and Russell throughout this whole race. But I do think it takes a little bit of negotiation away from Lewis, given that if everything went to plan today with the pit stops and the puncture, which was an unusual occurrence for Mercedes, it was completely out of what they normally have on a race weekend. Russell would have been up in the podium positions, for sure, first, second, or third. There's no doubt about it. That's what I feel like. So Mercedes would have ideally scored a 1-2 without a 7-time world champion. So do they need to shed that amount of money when they can secure almost the same result with much cheaper drivers? And I'm not taking anything away from Hamilton. And, Hamilton may have not got a puncture. He might have drove differently. He may have, spotted issues or identified issues quicker. He's got so much experience. He may have been able to prevent anything which happened today. But it's a very interesting conversation, and I'm interested to hear what you think, Alex.
I don't think it will affect negotiations much, if at all. One race does not make a season. Russell was brilliant. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he was brilliant, but that's not really the same as doing it over a whole season.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate that.
And Hamilton is not just a racing driver. He's an icon. He is an international star. He brings a level of commercial gravity to the Mercedes brand that nobody else on the grid and very few people in the entire world of professional sport can bring. So I think Hamilton is worth every penny to them. And what Russell did today, as incredible as it was, Hamilton does week after week after year after year, and he has done every single season pretty much.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But could Russell do that?
I can't imagine it making much of a difference overall. But it's a very interesting point because, sure, it's going to be in the back of Mercedes' mind, but George Russell isn't a new prospect to him. He's been with them a long time. So it's something that they've probably thought about before. Russell will definitely be a lot cheaper to begin with. He might go up in value quite considerably over time.
Yeah, sure.
But as to affecting the contract negotiations, probably not. I'd be very surprised. I think they kind of already know what situation things are, and as great as that race is, I don't know how much impact it will have on that situation.
Well, there you go. You asked a question and you've got 2 different answers from both Alex and I, and sometimes that just happens on the podcast. But
that question was from Shiv Bagnari, by the way.
Yeah, thank you very much for sending that in.
But thanks for your question. And now the next one from Bryant Hernandez, who we've had a question before, so thanks for getting in touch again. The battle for third in the Constructors is getting close, he says. Who will claim the best of the rest next weekend? I think McLaren will pull it off, he says. I agree. I can definitely agree with that.
Fanboy.
Fingers crossed. What do you think, Shane? Who's going to get third?
I don't know. Because this time last week we were sat down recording how Racing Point have thrown away points and how McLaren have done such a good job and pretty much, got such a decent lead in the Constructors' Championship. It would be a real miracle if Racing Point achieve a double podium. I think we mentioned last week in the podcast they would have to receive a double podium to catch up. And here we are, a week later.
We've done it. We did it. We influenced a Formula One race cosmically.
Oh my goodness. But this is exactly what we love about Formula One, the fact that it can change so much. I thought McLaren has secured third in the championship, and they were just to have 2 more normal races, almost matching the same as Racing Point. And here we are, Racing Point are now 10 points ahead, I think, and going into the last race. It's very interesting. I would like to see McLaren pull it off just because of their journey over the last 5 years, going from Honda and obviously they're with Renault now. So it's just a nice journey. They slipped so far back, and I just want to see them get that third place prize. And I don't even need to ask you this, Alex, but who do you think, not who do you want, but who do you think will achieve third in the championship?
In all seriousness, I think McLaren are in with a really good shout, but Racing Point clearly got a really good car. I think it probably is the best of the rest. In fact, I think it may even be better than the Red Bull car, and we'll touch on this as we go on, because I know that we're going to talk about Albon at some point, so we'll touch on that.
It's been a while.
But I think I would, as much as I would love to see McLaren get third, I think they've got a really good chance. Odds are probably on Racing Point right now, unless McLaren can really smash out a good result in Abu Dhabi, and it could happen. They've been good there before.
I think McLaren have been most consistent throughout the year with both their drivers getting points, and whereas Racing Point have had a singular good driver and then a driver in 9th or 10th. It's always been like one or the other. And this week they've just managed to pull it out of the bag and 2 drivers on the podium, which has thrown everything up into the air. But that's why we love Formula One. It's all going down to the wire. Despite the championship being wrapped up, it's just as exciting for 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th place, and especially in the drivers' championship as well. So thank you very much for that question. The next one is from Matt Exford, and on that was from Twitter. Should F1 introduce mid-race refueling for the batteries in the same way Formula E is planning to for 2022? It would look a little bit more green and less fossil fuely. So obviously F1 will eventually have to reduce its carbon footprint, and we know it's going to head in that direction in the next 10, 20, 30 years. I think we've done something on the podcast before talking about the future of Formula One when Honda announced their exit. Should they introduce mid-race refueling for batteries? I don't know. I really don't know.
Are we talking about the ERS here? We're talking about like the...
I think so, yeah. The deployment, which would so the deployment. I think any more strategy involved in the race obviously creates opportunity for other teams to out-strategize one another. So for that reason, I quite like to encourage, refueling of the batteries during the race. But also, I haven't said this season once that I feel like it's necessary. This season's been so varied and so up and down with results. I haven't said once that, we need to bring back refueling. I've thought that about previous seasons, but because the season's been so good, hasn't really crossed my mind. So I wouldn't mind. What's your thoughts, Alex?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Not really sure what the logistics of such a thing would be to recharge a battery, because obviously they need it to be, they'd probably want it to be pretty quick. One thing I like about the way pit stops currently work is that they're fast. When you watch older F1, where they have refueling and the like, and everything is that much slower. I don't know. I quite like the drama of having to have a really fast pit stop. I quite like that. How much it would slow it down, I have no idea. The concept is an interesting one, though, because let's say everyone is going around with, somewhere in the middle of 60% battery. And if you could suddenly charge up and come out of the pits and choose to charge your battery up, like you wouldn't have to do it, but you could choose to take maybe an extra second to go up to 100% battery, or maybe introduce an overcharge feature where you could go to 120%, there would be an incentive to do that. Yeah, it could be kind of interesting. It's certainly an interesting concept. Whether it would make it more green and use less fossil fuels, I don't have the expertise to say for certain, but it's a really interesting concept, and maybe it's something that we might see in the future as the electrical component of as the engine becomes more significant, which I think we will almost certainly see happen.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
And that's all of the questions that we got. I mean, thanks very much, everyone, for your questions. That's really, really appreciated, and we love going into all of those. One last thing to mention, though, before we get to the race discussion, which is that our friends over at the Outlap podcast, who are basically, I guess we could think of them as like our American cousins in the F1
Yes,
podcasting
exactly.
world. Shane, they had an appearance on their most recent episode, in fact, both episodes, because they do a preview and a review, where Shane predicted the results of the race, and he featured on there. So be sure to check out that episode. Are they at Outlap Podcast? I want to make sure I get it right. They are, yes, at Outlap F1 Podcast on Twitter. So Outlap Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to check them out in the latest episode of the Sakhir preview and review. How did you get on with your predictions, Shane?
I scored 6 points for my qualifying guesses. I got Russell and Bottas in the top 3. I just didn't get them in the right order. And I was about half a second off the pole lap. So I scored a point there. So I actually beat everyone else on the podcast, which I was quite thrilled about. I'm not sure it's going to happen. It would happen again. And obviously you're on it next week, Alex. So hopefully you can score another point for us this side of the pond.
I'm in a sticky situation because when I recorded my predictions, I obviously thought Hamilton would be racing. This was before we heard that he got COVID or anything. So I don't know if I'm going to have time to redo them because if we find out too late and then they record it, I'm not going to have time to redo it. So I might be going into it with Russell in the Mercedes because I was like, Hamilton will easily get pole. Hamilton will easily win. So I don't know.
0 points.
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, indeed. I might end up on a big fat 0, but I did make some reasonable predictions for the other parts of it. So we'll see. Maybe I'll get close.
I'll be interested to see how close your pole time is. I like to see whereabouts you are. There was some interesting stuff on that podcast. I listened to it on the way to work. It's a very good one. So do check that out.
Yeah, thanks for letting us be on the show, guys. And like Jane says, be sure to have a listen. We've already got a Drivers' World Champion. We've already got a Constructors' World Champion. Does that matter at all when it comes to the drama of the racing? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. What a race. One of the best races of the turbo hybrid era. This might even be the best season of the turbo hybrid era. I mean, where to even begin with all of this? Oh. Actually, I know exactly where I want to begin, and that's and I'm glad that you corrected yourself earlier, Shane. This circuit is not an oval. It's not an oval. Stop calling it an oval. It's not, by definition, it's not an oval. An oval track has turns that only go in one direction. This has got both lefts and rights, therefore it is not an oval. Just wanted to get that out of the way first.
And I apologise if I've upset anyone over the last week, on last week's podcast as well, when I called it the oval or the outer ring. The outer ring is a little bit more justified, but I think I called it an oval once or twice. So apologies, I got it wrong. And I will not call it the oval circuit again. Otherwise, Alex will throw something virtually at me.
Be ashamed of yourself.
I'm glad you brought it up and corrected it on my behalf.
You should be ashamed of yourself.
Oh, the amount of times I've heard that. You're not the first and you won't be the last. But where do we start? Take it away, Alex.
Well, normally we would say that Russell has some pretty big boots to fill with Hamilton gone. But apparently he was wearing much smaller race boots this year in order to fit into the Mercedes cockpit. So I feel like that usual phrase doesn't apply here because he actually had to fill some much smaller shoes than normal. There were some concerns about his height when we saw him getting into the car for the first time, and that was certainly the big excitement coming into the races that we're going to see Russell in a Mercedes. It's finally happening.
It is finally happening, and on that height as well, he was quite high in that car, wasn't he?
He's a tall guy. He's a very tall guy.
He is tall compared to Hamilton, and when they were reviewing the qualifying laps between Bottas and Russell, they put both drivers side by side. They analysed each corner, and the camera's in identical places for each car. And on Bottas, you can see the steering wheel, and because it's a night race, you can see everything, all the display, the HUD. It looks fantastic. And on Russell's side, you see his helmet. He's so far up in that car. That's where the 2000s of a second was lost in aerodynamics. I'm saying right now. No, jokes aside, that was a squeeze for him. And I heard that he was battered and bruised and received quite a bit of physio. Had some ice packs standing by whenever he got out of the car because The shoulder straps were tight. The seat was tight. Like you said, he had to wear size 11 shoes, and he's a size 12. So just not comfortable at all. So fair play to him for. I mean, given that he was on a drive with the best car on the grid, I think he could make do. But nevertheless, a bit of a squeeze for Russell to get into Hamilton's car, and small boots to fill.
And of course, we saw a familiar face in new overalls, but we also saw some new faces as well. We had Pietro Fittipaldi in the Haas, obviously replacing Grosjean, who, as we mentioned, has driven his last race. And I believe we'll see Fittipaldi next week as well. Then will he be?
Yep, I think that's confirmed. Yep, that has been confirmed, I believe. Yep.
And Jack Aitken taking over for Russell in the Williams, who we could very well see again next week as well.
I would like to see him again next week. He did a good race this week.
Both of them had very respectable weekends. I know, we'll touch on what happened with Aitken, but for their first Formula One race, I think they both had pretty respectable weekends. And
absolutely,
it's always exciting to see some new names above the garages. So it was always exciting to come to see that as well. We come into FP1, basically just observing that Russell was pretty confident over the radio. Some people might be a little bit dazzled by the spotlight on him, but he didn't seem to be phased at all. He was all about the process, all about making it happen. And I don't know about you, but if I was to have a race engineer, I'd want it to be Peter Bonington. So
absolutely,
he was in safe pair of hands.
Calm, cool, collective, and we just reassured Russell through every stage of that weekend. Like you said, there's sometimes we hear engineers on the radio get a little bit agitated, get a little bit loud, telling the drivers to get the head down and crack on, and or telling them to speed up. But no, Bono, spot on. Yeah, absolutely spot on. I think that played a massive role in Russell's weekend, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And the hype level started to rise a little bit as Russell took the top spot
in
really FP1.
Did.
And then he did the same thing in FP2 as well. And some others weren't quite so fortunate. Leclerc had some kind of drive shaft issue, which was a problem for him. Norris also had a problem and was out.
He did, yeah.
And Vettel had another problem. He had that kind of spin where he saw him go past Magnussen.
In such a strange way, wasn't it? Just slide. Yes, I did. Yeah, it was an odd one. Magnussen did well to avoid that spinning Vettel. Really well. Yeah, just a strange angle to come off the track. It was really bizarre.
And of course, we also saw Grosjean back in the paddock earlier on as he came back. So it was good to see him return, but not a whole load going on in free practice. Mainly just that the hype was building over Russell as we saw him sitting at the top of the leaderboards in FP1 and FP2. A little bit slower at FP3. Perhaps was testing his long run pace or had some issues.
Yeah, he said he was making some changes to the car, just experimenting because he's never driven this car before, so he had to get to know what works and what doesn't work, and he just made all the wrong decisions. And that's just part of the process. By making a decision, if it works well, you keep on your car. If it doesn't, then you revert back to the old one. So he managed to find out which doesn't work on the car on FP3, and obviously didn't use that for qualifying, which is exactly what these practice sessions are made for.
Now, speaking of qualifying, it was a real mix-up because we had 7 different teams in the top 8, which that alone is pretty exciting. And just to go over the overall results, we saw some very, very good results for Leclerc, who did a fantastic effort.
He did
Q3.
He
went out earlier, avoided a lot of the traffic. Yeah, absolutely brilliant lap, which at the time was second fastest.
Yep. And I think he was so confident with that lap. He jumped out the car when he went back to the pits and said, I can't go faster. He was 100% happy with that lap. He jumped out, went to the weighbridge, and just started that process of checking in after qualifying. And that's a driver who's extracted 100% of their car. They knew they weren't going to go any faster. They didn't have any other tyres to go on. So obviously that played a big role in if he could go out again. But P2, he was P2 for a while, and that was in Q3. Fantastic job, given that Vettel was 13th. So his teammate was 13th, and he just put it on P2 at the time, eventually qualifying in 4th place, which is a fantastic effort for Ferrari on a speed-dependent track as well. Like that's brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it just shows how much he nailed that Sector 2 in particular.
Mm.
It was a really good result for Kvyat as well. It's only the third
Yes.
time this season that he's out-qualified Gasly, and in general has been, pretty solidly overshadowed by Gasly, not least because of his race win, but just results in general. But it was a good result for Kvyat, and it's hard to say what the situation is with that second AlphaTauri seat, but it's looking fairly likely that Daniel could be on his way out. So he's making a pretty solid statement as the season comes to an end, so hopefully he can finish on more of a high, and this qualifying result was one way to do that.
What I liked about this qualifying was that a matter of a tenth of a second separated 6 cars, and it was actually, do we need to go again? Oh, we're in normal races. Oh, we're 3 tenths clear. We probably don't need to go out again. And this time it was go out as many times as you possibly can. I know the Mercedes went out 3 times in Q3, and not many tracks you get an opportunity to have 3 runs. And you look at Spa, you're lucky if you get 2. It's such a long outlap, in-lap, outlap, racing lap, and then in-lap. Yeah. This one, 3 minutes, and you're done. And then you're back in the box in 3 minutes' time. That's crazy, which made qualifying all the more interesting, especially with the traffic as well, which wasn't as bad as I thought. I really expected this weekend to be a bit Monza-esque, where everyone's like queuing to get to the last lap at the last possible minute. But it wasn't. There was a lot more respect going on this time. Cars were getting out of the way. Cars were, going on hot laps. It was all over the place, but there wasn't too many blocking incidents. I don't think anyone got penalised for any blocking at all, which is amazing given the 2.2 mile circuit we had.
Makes a change.
Indeed. A good change, mind you.
Shout out for Aitken as well. We were talking about the newer drivers. He was only a 10th from Latifi. I think that's a really good effort, considering that obviously just jumped in the car and Latifi's had the whole season.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily say that as a slight to Latifi. I think that's just a pretty solid effort from Aitken to get what he can from the car. So yeah, that's a good result for him getting into P18. He even beat Kimi Räikkönen. So
he beat a world champion in qualifying.
Pretty solid result there. Lastly, before we get to the top runners and the sort of the headline of qualifying, just want to mention Lando Norris, very poor qualifying. I think he may have been sent out at the wrong time, but it just didn't string a lap together. Just kept going out and making an error somewhere. You mentioned that he had cool tyres, but regardless, it was the worst qualifying result of his season so far. And
which is
we know
a shame.
He was starting from the back of the grid anyway because of his engine change. But it was a little bit disappointing from Norris, and kind of expected better in general from McLaren here, but wasn't to be, I guess.
Well, looking at Norris's Q1 time, it was 54.194. If he had done that in Q2 and then in Q3, he would have put it in 10th place. So the pace was there. I just don't think he extracted it at the right time, unfortunately. He was very disappointed. Went to social media and explained that he was disappointed himself, and it's a hard hit. It was his worst qualifying session this year. So, but he made up for it in the race. The initial opening laps were really good. That's what a bad qualifying session does. It gives you an opportunity to show your overtaking skills the next day. So, there's pros and cons.
Definitely when you start from the back, the new engine, foot down.
Absolutely.
I mean, your foot's going to be down at this track anyway because it's like
4 braking zones.
Yeah, 4 braking zones and like 70% full throttle. So.
That's crazy. What a track.
But of course, the headline of qualifying was Bottas taking pole, which I thought that he would do, and I expected him to do, but nobody knew it was going to be that close. Was it 26 thousandths
of a second? Yeah.
That's really close. And of course, Verstappen was only another 30 thousandths behind that. So, like you mentioned, it's really, really close in the top part of the grid. And Russell, absolutely outstanding effort to put that car there. So Mercedes, the Mercedes powered pole positions continue.
Yeah, despite Hamilton being absent, that was a brilliant lap from Bottas, and equally brilliant lap from Russell. And I thought it was interesting. I watched the post qualifying interviews, and both of them said they had more to give. Both of them said they had a couple of early. They could have braken a little bit later. They could have taken a corner better. Bottas highlighted on many occasions that he didn't have the toe from the car in front of him. So I think that was him just saying, I can go faster. I know you're close, but I could have gone faster. I felt a little bit rivalry straight after the session itself, and I found that quite interesting, given that George is only there on a temporary basis at the moment, doing them a favour. But I don't know if people are feeling that like their job's at risk or there's competitiveness. If you haven't checked out that post qualifying interview, I highly suggest it, because some of the press media asked some horrific questions about Bottas's career and whether George is there to take over. And respect to all of them, none of them they've always said that they haven't thought about it. They're doing what's best for the team. But blimey, there were some awkward questions in that conference. I'm glad it was virtual, because I was cringing at home.
Yeah, they went straight for the jugular.
They sure did.
Bottas.
Yeah.
Right, shall we settle in for 87 laps?
87 laps.
Sakhir Grand Prix.
Oh, blimey. What an emotional weekend it was again. Bahrain has thrown up some... Just my emotions have been all over the place for the last 8 days. It's been crazy.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. I love this track.
I love the track. And I tell you what, I like this... I like the outer ring as well. It makes it a good... out of all the tracks we've been to this year, the new ones and the old ones which have come back, this is one of the ones I'd really want to stay going into the into the next couple of years. You could easily do a double header in the same country, and it wouldn't put any extra strain on the teams through travel arrangements or anything. This is a track which I think should stay.
I don't know how possible it is because of the logistics and all the rest of it, but I really think that it's possible that maybe not next year, because like I say, it may all be a little bit set in stone contractually and the rest, but for future seasons, I really hope that Formula One look at what has happened this year and use it to augment the calendar in the future, even if it's just doing things like this, where we used a different layout at a circuit we already know. It can make a really big difference to the racing, and almost everything that happened this weekend was breaking records and unprecedented events, and just little things like that really add so much to a season. So I really hope that it changes the way that we see the calendar unfold in 2022 and beyond.
I completely agree. I can't
kick us off, Shane. Kick us off.
Okay.
Lights out.
Here we go. It's lights out and away we go. Bottas is obviously in P1. Russell's in P2, the dirty side of the grid. If you watch any of the Formula 2 the weekend, you know it's an horrendous side of the grid to start. Every car had a bit of a horrific start if they started on the right-hand side. There was a bit of a sandstorm, actually, just after qualifying. So the track was a bit dusty for the Formula 2 race. It was very windy, I say dusty, it was a bit grainy. So traction was all over the place. But it's lights out and away we go. And the two Mercedes bolt off the line. Bottas gets a good start, there's no doubt about it. Russell gets a slightly better start, which is really good for Russell, because in the Williams over the last couple of weeks, he's not had brilliant starts, and I really did expect him, despite the fact I think he's a great driver, I expected him to slip down the pack a little bit on the start. But no, the opposite happened. He got a slightly better start than Bottas. And going into turn one, they were side by side. And Russell, being on the inside of turn one, managed to quite nicely and neatly take the lead going into turn two and turn three. And I was standing up at this point. I was like, this is happening. I was like, let me talk you through my emotions, Alex. And I'm sorry for everyone who's probably wants us to get through the laps, but Russell could have quite easily sat in P2 for the whole race. He wants this Mercedes seat. There's no doubt about it. So if he wants the podium, he could have quite easily played the ultimate wingman and be a wingman to Bottas. Let Bottas go off in P1, follow Bottas through in P2, have a really nice, safe race, safe pit stops, just do what you need to do to get 20 odd points and maybe a fastest lap to show that you can drive that car. Nope, not in Russell's mindset. He's there to take the win. He's there to take the fight to Bottas because he's a racing driver. And by turn three, he was leading, not only leading, he'd gone off so far into the distance. By turn four, Russell had gone into the sector two and Bottas was a second behind him, which is just crazy. So most cars get through turn 1, 2, and 3 without any scratches. It's quite a clean start, actually. And then my heart sunk a little bit, Alex. I don't know about you, but it was like watching it last week. We saw this cloud of smoke, and it was a Alfa Romeo, I believe. Was it Kimi Raikkonen?
Raikkonen, yeah.
Who spun off in the exact same direction as Grosjean did. And, luckily for Kimi, he just had a spin and jumped back on the track. But for a split second there, it was almost an identical scene to last week, and my heart just sunk. And
It's
Yeah,
that
it
same
wasn't.
camera angle.
It was exactly the same camera angle, and the only thing missing was a an explosion. And like I said, I was ecstatic that Russell got off to got such a good start, and then my heart and everything just went boom because I saw the exactly same camera angle, almost identical incident to last week. But obviously he didn't hit the wall, which is fantastic. But yeah, what did you make of the opening lap? So take us through the turn 4 incident.
Yeah, so just coming straight off what happened right at the beginning, Bottas got a little bit out of shape after Russell had got past, and he was immediately under threat from, it must have been Perez and Verstappen. And Leclerc had slipped back a little bit at this point, a slightly worse start. Then coming up to turn 4, we have Leclerc just coming in a bit too hot, just a little bit too eager to jump up the inside, and he ends up clouting Perez. Now I think Perez, it's the first lap of the race. I really think that Perez should be looking at that and thinking there's probably going to be someone coming up the inside. You don't really have the rights to cut off the racing line or cut off the apex like that. It's kind of unfortunate. I think Perez was kind of lucky not to take any damage or end up worse off. Leclerc, though, hits him so hard that it just ruins the front left. And he's out basically. And at the same time, Verstappen, who's coming around the outside, who's largely trying to stay out of trouble and is being rather un-Verstappen-esque and being quite cautious.
I was just about to say, he was being very cautious.
He's just a bit of a victim here. However, it doesn't really come off the power, and I think Max forgot that there was a gravel trap there because he kind of tries to get on the power a little bit earlier than he should have done and literally just drives into the wall. So I think he forgot that there was gravel there in the moment.
I think I saw something on Twitter that the gravel trap was also the painted off of the track. So the runoff of the track was painted the same color as the gravel, just so it blends in. It's a desert track. You make it all look very deserty. And I completely agree. When I first saw that incident, I thought Max has just driven it straight into the wall. I'm surely he could have avoided that. But looking back on it, he does put his foot down. He maintains that speed. And actually,
he tries to carry it round, doesn't he? And
if you look at the trajectory, he can. If you look at the trajectory, and that was all solid tarmac or runoff, he would have made that corner and rejoined the track. But he just didn't notice. I honestly think he didn't notice the gravel and pull it in the wall, and he was not happy. Jumped out of the car, kicked the barrier, and I think that's more of a why? How did I not see that? Kind of I've ended my own race kind of situation. It was impeded by the accident, but I thought he did. He backed out of it going into turn 4. He saw what was happening. He read that from a mile off. So he hit the brakes and then saw those two go off and then put the foot back down on the accelerator, thinking he could, take a different line, and just didn't work.
I felt a bit sorry for Max here because he could have capitalized on battling Mercedes to, maybe I don't know if Verstappen would have won. It's hard to say what the Red Bull pace would have been on this track, and I'm sure I've already mentioned, I'm sure we're going to talk about Albon here, but it's hard to say how that Red Bull would have fared, and because we didn't have Max's performance to compare Albon to, it's difficult to give a completely accurate appraisal of what Red Bull's chances would have been here, but certainly you'd think Verstappen's chances would have been pretty good because, given his performance that season, you'd always fancy Max to some degree.
Oh, absolutely.
But now he might, it's possible, given the final results, it's not a chance that's completely gone, but I think his chance of coming second in the Drivers' Championship, has rather disappeared somewhat, possibly.
It's almost a good job that Bottas finished as far down as he did, because if Max had been anywhere near that top 3, they would have been going into Abu Dhabi almost neck and neck on points. And that's something I didn't think we'd be saying going into the final race between a Mercedes and a Red Bull at the start of the year. So luckily for Bottas, Max, put himself out the race, and, now Bottas stands a good chance of retaining that P2 and just not having that embarrassment going into the, coming out of the season. Second best teammate.
This is Max's 5th DNF of the season as well.
And that's crazy. And I don't think has Bottas retired at all this year? I don't think so.
Once?
He may have retired once. Possibly? And he also picked up a bit of damage in Imola. But if Max had finished, a couple more races, we'd be seeing a fight for second place, which is, again, not something anyone would have predicted going into this season, especially with the speed of the Mercedes.
Oh, yeah. Bottas retired in the Eiffel Grand Prix.
He did. Yeah, you're correct. So after that incident,
so pretty not good for Max, and it left Albon as the lone Red Bull.
Yep. So after that incident, safety car deployed lap 1. So Russell's fantastic start was then obviously neutralized, and was leading the pack behind the safety car. And I'm sure nerves were flying, and stuff was all going on. But safety car was out. When I look back on these notes, I was like, safety car was out for 6 laps. It went back in on lap 7, but obviously with such a short lap, the safety car does go round at more than road speed. So even 2.2 miles in a safety car is still going to be quite rapid. We're talking like a minute 20, a minute 30, which is long compared to the lap time, but isn't long when it comes to the laps.
And they did have 2 cars to recover from the same place.
Yeah, they did, to be fair, but it was right next to one of the cranes overhead, so that was lucky for them. So lap 7. Did anyone, just before we move on to lap 7 when the safety car comes in, I don't think anyone boxed, did they? Apart from Perez, who went in for a wing change and a fresh set of tyres. I don't think anyone else actually boxed because everyone else came off lap 1 without any parts missing.
Yeah, I think Raikkonen was okay after his spin.
Yeah.
I don't think he pitted. I think you're right. I think it was just Perez who, after lap 1 was back of the pack.
Yep. So moving on to lap 7 now. So the restart happens, and George gets off to a fantastic start. There's no doubt about it. And Bottas is behind George at the moment, but not for long because Sainz in the McLaren had such a brilliant restart, was alongside Bottas going down the pit straight and sends it into turn 1 and gets the place going into turn 2 and turn 3 respectively. So he gets the place initially, and then I think Bottas actually gets it back going into turn 4, doesn't he? So there's a lot of jostling going around with the Mercedes and the McLaren. At this point, I thought that would be a bit of a theme throughout the race. The McLaren looks so strong, but I think that was Sainz's only opportunity going up against Bottas. I think after that he stayed a couple of seconds behind just to preserve tyres and preserve life. But at that point, I thought, oh, here we go. We've got George out in the lead, and even better, we've got a McLaren fighting for second place. This is going to be an amazing race. But like I said, George got off to a fantastic start and was already 1.1 seconds ahead of Bottas going into at the end of lap 7.
And of course, it was a great start for both McLarens because Sainz had got up to third, as you mentioned, was battling Bottas. And Norris had got up 9 places into the points from his 19th position start. So, yeah, that was great stuff for him. And we did see also by about lap 10, you mentioned the 1.1 seconds. I think it was nearly 2 seconds up by lap 10 for Russell. So he was pulling away. It was a case of he looked totally comfortable out front. So by that point, it was, well, here we go. This is
happening.
Russell's it's going to be both Mercedes cars, 25 seconds ahead of everyone else, and Russell doing a Hamilton and just keeping Bottas at arm's length. I mean, I was fully prepared for that eventuality as it currently stood.
I would have been over the moon if that was the eventuality. What was good with this track as well, because it was so short, we had lots of overtakes happening in the midfield. So back on lap 8, Norris sends it down the inside of Sebastian Vettel. Brilliant overtake. Really, really close going into that corner. Norris is getting really good at, I don't want to say he's getting really good at overtaking. That sounds patronising, but he's pulled off some amazing overtakes this season, far more than last season. So hopefully he's getting more comfortable in that car. And we're going to see like the best of Norris in the next couple of years, or hopefully just see him become an even more complete driver. Who struggled was Alex Albon. And I don't want to talk about this too much at the moment because we're only on lap 9, but Alex Albon gets overtaken by Vettel going into turn 1. And again, we didn't have Max's pace to compare it against, but given that, and likewise, we didn't have Leclerc's pace to compare Vettel against. So we had 2 drivers who both teammates had stacked it into turn 4 on the opening lap. But Alex gets overtaken by Vettel, which is, if you look at this season as a whole, probably not a good sign. And it's a really crucial couple of weeks for Alex Albon. Like there's no confirmation over his seat. You've got your direct comparison, which is probably Perez doing brilliantly at the moment. And as the lead Red Bull, all eyes are on you. Usually, I can imagine Max takes a lot of the limelight. That's where all the points are going to come from. But all eyes are on Alex Albon, and he got taken by Sebastian Vettel going into turn 1. So not brilliant, to be honest, by Albon at the moment. But what's next? Have you got anything else?
With Leclerc and Verstappen out, you've got all of these cars that are vying for a chance at the time seemed like the last podium place. Because
Absolutely.
those are the two that you'd think would be up there given their position, or I don't know, maybe less so Leclerc, but definitely Verstappen being out sort of opened up this gap where you had like 5 or 6 cars who were well within a shout. And one driver who thought was doing really well was Kvyat, who was doing really well to hold on to Ricciardo during the opening positions. I mean, you'd expect Ricciardo to start pulling away, but Kvyat held on to him pretty well and put himself in contention for that podium position as well in the initial stages. So that was really good to see that not all of the AlphaTauri limelight was on Gasly. So good to see that. Then we have some more overtakes going on. There's lots of stuff in the midfield. Albon was also overtaken by Perez later on as well. So that was a kind of a landmark moment. That's a little bit later on in the lap 20s, but Albon was kind of struggling during the whole opening section of the race in particular. I think
just
I was
another
kind
mention.
of expecting him to be able to capitalize on losing some of those positions because he started 12th, but other people had showed how possible it was to gain a lot of positions during those opening stages, and I think Albon actually went backwards at the beginning.
Yeah, indeed. So many drivers showed what you could do throughout the race if you had like a fresh set of tyres on, how far you could go. We've seen it with Russell a couple of times. We saw it with Norris as well. We saw it with Perez, who was at the back of the grid at lap 1. So there was no reason why you'd think Alex Albon in that Red Bull couldn't secure more points than he did. If I'd said to you at the start of the race, both Mercedes have stacked it, they're not in contention for the podium, who are you going to put constructor at the top? You probably would have said Red Bull. But you shouldn't have to say Red Bull if it's Max and not a Red Bull if it's Alex Albon. That's the problem. But I'm sure we'll talk about Alex Albon a little bit more down the line. I don't want this to turn into like a beating on him session. But just a shout out to Perez, who, like I said, was at the back of the grid after lap 1. On lap 14, he was now into P11. He was flying, absolutely flying. And I don't think at this point anyone had started the pit stop phases apart from himself. So on merit, he was doing some amazing overtakes. So that Racing Point had some serious pace in this race.
One thing that we didn't see as much of that we perhaps expected was more mechanical and technical issues in regards to the strain on the engine. Obviously, it's a very large amount of time to be going full throttle, and we do experience it with tracks like Monza as well. But I think we possibly expected, with the heat of the desert, we kind of expected there to be that to be more of an issue. And we did see Sainz complaining about issues with his deployment, but that's more of a software thing.
Yeah.
And Albon was complaining about being slow on the straights, but again, that could just be the characteristics of the car. We know that the Red Bull is not really as fast in a straight line. It's got more of a high downforce kind of approach to it. So yeah, it's hard to tell how much of that is the aspect of the car and how much of it is caused by the nature of the circumstances. I think then we come on to a couple more overtakes just before the pit stop phase. Albon actually makes a good move on Norris for 9th on lap 21.
Yeah, both Alex and Perez take Norris on that lap.
Yeah, Norris seemed to be struggling a little bit in this phase. And Vettel also had something of a luck up and lost out to Albon and Perez as well. So yeah, kind of mixed conditions going on in the midfield. Then we kind of get closer to the pit stop phase. So I don't know if there's anything you want to cover before we get to people start pitting.
Nothing much apart from George is keeping around a 2-second gap to Bottas. He seems comfortable, and at this point it seems like we're a quarter way through the race. We're on lap 20, so just under a quarter way through the race, and we haven't seen any issues with Russell at all, and he's just taking the challenge and ran with it.
So then most of the cars start coming in around this sort of time, sort of around lap sort of 26 to 30.
Yes.
That's when people start coming into pit.
Yep, that's what I've got.
fairly this round of pit stops, as opposed to later on in the race, was a bit not as eventful, and mostly just people switching. But we can see that some cars are staying out and going for one stoppers. Ocon, in particular, I thought did a really, really good job, and that stint that he did on the mediums was
superb, wasn't it?
It was fantastic and key to his P2 finish. He was looking really, really strong and holding Perez out of DRS range, pretty comfortably. It wasn't like it was on a knife edge. He was comfortably ahead. And I think that if it weren't for later on some of the mistakes that were made under the VSC, who knows? I mean, Ocon could have been in the shout with a win. I mean, he was putting in a really good performance, and I think it was. And Perez, as we'll discuss, he had an amazing performance, but also, as with a lot of these things, you sometimes just have to be in the right place at the right time, take your opportunities when you get them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If that weren't the case, I mean, it could have been Ocon's. So I thought he had a fantastic early stint on those mediums and was doing really well to make the one-stopper work. And he's done that a few times this season, so that's clearly one of his strengths.
It's one of his stronger playouts or stronger strategies is doing the one stop, because he does tyre management really well. So
we know also that both Mercedes, just speaking of problems, both Mercedes were also told to stay off the curb around sort of lap 30, just after the pit stops. Both cars had laps deleted by this point, clearly showing how much they were pushing each other. Which made it pretty exciting.
Was bouncing between Russell and Bottas, but that wasn't because they were setting fastest lap. It's because the other person was fastest lap was getting discounted, so that it was going back to the original person. It was a bit confusing, and throughout this race, actually, I just want to talk about the Sky Sports commentators. I could count on both hands how many times they got Russell and Bottas confused, or Norris and Sainz confused, and talking about punctures and engine deployment issues and the overcut work and then the undercut work, and they got it wrong so many times to the point where I was post night shift and I was sat there like, no, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense at all. I'm pretty sure you're talking about Russell. Russell's got the pit stop. Well, Russell's got the puncture. I can see it on the screen. Like, you're watching the same screens as we are, but you've got more detail. Get this right. Don't start talking about Bottas and how unlucky he is, and then someone correct you. It was just a bit messed up, to be honest. And something else I want to touch on as well is AWS, Amazon Workspace, and how it popped up on lap 36. Yes, we do. Yes, we do, Alex. It popped up on lap 36 in a very interesting tyre graphic. If any of you play the Formula One game, imagine that all your tyres are bright red, apart from your front right, and you've only got 10% left. So that basically means that your tyres...
He's like, tyre situation's not good, mate.
Yeah. You might lose a bit of grip going into turn one, but no, these tyres, according to AWS, were on the edge of blowing up. I've never seen 10% on all three tyres. That was horrendous. Anyway, thank you very much to whoever has screen control over the radio messages, because 10 seconds later, Russell's message pops up on the screen saying, "My tyres are fine," and then he sets the fastest lap. So there's another bit of inconsistency there. The AWS calculating that the tyres are completely dead and he should be falling off the cliff, and but Russell telling him that the tyres are fine, and actually goes for another 10 laps. It does another 20% of the race on the same set of tyres. So AWS, I don't know how you get your calculations, but sort it out, because it's clearly not the case.
Where is that coming from? I don't know. I mean, are they just looking at the tyres? Are they just guessing? It's like when they sometimes say that so-and-so will be within so-and-so overtaking
striking distance.
Within this many. Yeah, striking distance.
Yeah.
Which is a really strange way of putting it, because striking distance means to hit someone. I mean, it's literally the wrong usage of that phrase. So I don't. What are they doing? Honestly,
I don't know. But I would have been interested to see what they would have popped up on lap 45, a lap before Russell pits, because if they were 10% on lap 36 after 36 laps, and he does another 10 laps, what were they? 0%, 1%,
minus 50%.
The minus 50%. The tires are gone. Like, it was just AWS, get in the bin.
I think it's the fact that they're presented with such certainty. It's like, this is the information.
And it's bright on the screen. It pops up.
I can see that that's not the case.
Yeah, exactly. And then for whoever decided to put that, Russell's comments on the screen, I thought, well, someone's either gonna, there will be questions as to how that was allowed to happen. For such a prestige sport, how can one company suggest that the tires are dead and then they have to manually display these things? It's not automatically popped up. Someone's gone, that's a good bit of information. I'll display that on the screen. But in the space of 10 seconds, you got polar opposite answers.
I hope they've got a sense of humor about themselves at least.
Oh, it was so funny, wasn't it? It was unbelievable. But who did have tyre issues was Bottas. Bottas came on the radio a lap later, lap 37, complaining that his front tyres were starting to go off, which is fair enough because he's been on the same set of tyres for 37 laps.
And that was a situation that he was going to have to get familiar with later on as well.
Oh, blimey. Yeah. What a race.
Speaking of one-stoppers, Stroll was doing the same thing. By about lap 39, he'd still not pitted, so he was looking for a one-stopper too. And around that time as well, I haven't written down the lap time, but I know that it's around a familiar period of time because it's when Vettel pitted, which I thought it was interesting that as he pitted, Sainz was kind of right behind him, was trying to get a little bit of a slipstream off him as he went into the pits. I thought that was kind of interesting and just anything for that little bit extra advantage down that straight. And
it was a bold strategy, wasn't it? As in, he weaved, well, not weaved because that suggests you go back and forth, but I thought he was going straight into that pits at a colossal speed. And then he did weave back onto the pit straight.
You don't see that all that often.
Oh, no, you don't. But, it might have been do whatever Vettel doesn't do, so he was probably looking at the pit lane thinking if Vettel doesn't go in, I'm going to go straight in and, or vice versa. So fair play. Looked awesome. Loved the sparks. Again, the sparks on this track is just brilliant. Quite a bumpy track, actually, which I thought was, it adds to the characteristics of the driving style, doesn't it? Some drivers prefer a bumpy track, some drivers don't, or other drivers deal with a bumpy track better, should I say. But yeah, it looked good on TV. The camera angles at this track are fantastic, to be fair.
Yeah, the cars always look great here under the lights,
absolutely.
And yeah, with the sparks, there's like a few changes in camber with some of the turns, which as a lot of the turns are quite fast, especially on this outer kind of section, this outer
Oval.
circuit. No, it's not an oval. It's not an oval. We're not doing that. It's it just means that the car's pressing into the track with the downforce, and we'll get all the huge flashes of sparks. Sometimes when there's so many, you sort of automatically assume there must be something wrong, but that's them working as intended.
Because in previous years at day races, which is obviously the majority of the calendar, if you see sparks, it's usually that a front wing is scraping across the ground, or the tray underneath the car is has fallen off, and you've got a bit of metalwork falling on the ground. Not in Singapore or Bahrain. It's just constant sparks, and it becomes, instead of becoming a hazard, it's a spectacle of the sport as such.
Yeah. Now, I think we do have we do have a couple of other things to go through, perhaps before we get to the VSC.
I've got a couple here. Yeah,
we have Kvyat. Kvyat successfully undercuts Ricciardo after the pit stops for what is a sort of net P4. So he's continuing to do a really good job in that AlphaTauri. Daniel Ricciardo is not an easy guy to get past. So
did a fantastic
that's really
job.
good. This was P9 at the time, but obviously there's a few people ahead that are doing one stoppers. So that was a really good move, and he managed to have the pace to make the undercut work, which is, I would have thought, probably that much harder at such a short track.
Yeah, well, the tyre life and maybe the new tyres and a bit of fresh air. Not that there was much, clear air on the track. All it takes is a lap or two, because it's such a short lap, bigger gains.
Yeah, true.
So,
I was also going to mention something that I forgot to point out earlier, which is that Kimi Räikkönen was the first car to be lapped on lap 26 of this race. Now, I did expect to perhaps see more people behind more laps by the end of it, but of course we had VSCs and safety cars and all the rest of it, so that didn't really happen. But the fact that somebody was lapped on lap 26 and Räikkönen hadn't, it wasn't like he pitted or he was really far behind. He was just happened to be the last car at the time. So,
one of those
that's
things,
how short the lap was and how fast they were going.
Yeah, it was good. I like to see shorter races more often. I really would. It provided such good entertainment. So on lap 46, we've already mentioned that Russell boxed for hard tyres. It was an average pit stop by Mercedes. Actually, I'm going to, instead of calling it an average pit stop by Mercedes at 2.4 seconds, I'm going to turn around and say it was a fantastic pit stop by Mercedes at 2.4 seconds because in comparison to the rest of the race, that was the best pit stop they did. I'm not upset at all. I'm trying to stay impartial, but they ruined everything. And a bit of a worry, bit of a heart and mouth situation for me at least. Russell on the radio as he comes out the pits of the next lap, declaring that he's got no power. I've got no power, Bono. We've heard that time and time before from Hamilton, and your heart just sinks. You think, oh no, this is his first chance of getting points.
Hamilton is more no tires. He's a no tires kind of guy, whereas Russell is more like no power.
Yeah.
But he's setting out his stall,
Yeah. He's getting those catchphrases. He's just feeding them in now. But it seemed to be that there was a setting he changed on the wheel at the beginning of the race, which eliminated any issues. There was a gremlin, but he fixed it at the beginning of the race. But when you go into the pit stop, clearly it automatically triggers different settings for your car. You've got a limiter, you've got different modes, you've got to engage different parts of the car. And then when coming out of the pit stop, he just needed to do exactly what he did at the start of the race to get rid of those gremlins and receive full deployment. Because as he was saying, I've got no power. He went purple sector 1 and purple sector 2, which was a bit of a relief, but it didn't stop me from worrying a little bit.
It was a scary moment, wasn't it? Especially seeing as he had just had his Russell hustle instead of hammer time.
That's the one, the Russell hustle.
I was trying to think of something better. That's what they were saying on the broadcast, but I think Russell hustle is probably the best one.
It's as good as it's done again at the moment. But we'll keep on talking about Russell just for the time being and the whole pit stop phase of him. So obviously a massive loss in this track. 23-second pit stop is pretty much half. It's 50% of the lap time or almost. So you do lose quite a bit. And Russell came out of that pit stop, and within a lap, he was 18 seconds behind Bottas. Now, given that he was a couple of seconds ahead, he was only like 2 seconds ahead at the time. You expect it to be around the 22, 23 second mark, almost like a net pit stop. It's going to be close when Bottas comes out after the pits. But lap 48, 49, and 50, George just keeps on pushing, and that time, that deficit to Bottas is coming down. It goes from 18 seconds to 17 seconds to 16 seconds. Bottas pits on lap 50, has Mercedes complete another decent stop for the weekend, safe, secure, all the right tyres, stop, and George is 8 seconds ahead. So the undercut was just unbelievable. Like you said, like you wouldn't expect it to be that significant on such a short track, but he went from having a 2 second lead to an 8 second lead in the space of 3 laps, and the pit stops were both 2.4 and 2.3 seconds. So yeah, crazy stuff. Russell definitely had the pace. Bottas seemingly struggled throughout the weekend. Even when both cars had no issues, Bottas seemed to be the lesser favourite Mercedes at the time.
Yeah, we were seeing Russell really giving it everything that he had to make up that time. So yeah, it was very impressive. Sort of 8.5 seconds in the lead after Bottas pitted. So yeah, it just showed, and there was a couple of cars in between them as well. So I think that kind of compounded that, because there was going to be cars that he had to get through, even if they were going to be blue flagged. It's still time you're kind of not really doing your optimum racing, where you may have to go around someone you don't necessarily want to. So it showed how hard Russell was giving it absolutely everything.
Absolutely, and with so many straights on this track, because obviously primarily this track is built up with 3 straights, and then sector 2 being a little almost bit of an S section. The blue flags were almost easily navigated, because as long as you weren't in sector 2, or 10 seconds later, if you're in sector 2, you're going to be on a long straight, and the pass is easy. So blue flags are really well negotiated this weekend, and that's something I thought a lot of cars might trip up from. I honestly thought if Russell was going to lose any points or positions, it might be because he trips up over blue flags, but it wasn't to be the case.
Well, from blue flags to yellow flags, we then come to our VSC lap 55. Nicholas Latifi, unfortunately, I think he had some kind of oil leak. And I thought this was a real shame. Latifi was actually having a pretty good race. He was up 4 places from the beginning.
He was in P12 or P13, wasn't he?
He certainly was at one point, yeah. But I think he was, I think it might have been, P12 or P13 when he was out. Yeah, I think you're right.
It's a shame because, and I'll let you continue, but there's a lot less pressure on Latifi this weekend, because actually the teammate who he usually races against and usually comes second to is in a different car, and now he's got someone with limited experience. So he, instead of asking the questions and asking for advice, he was giving the advice and almost being that that big brother, giving that, that helping hand. So I think that might have helped him going into this weekend. And actually, if he just has a normal race, he's probably going to come out ahead of his teammate. It takes the pressure off, and stress and pressure can do a lot for a driver. We've seen drivers thrive under pressure and stress, and we've seen drivers absolutely crumble under stress. So it's a massive shame, but yeah, do continue, Alex. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. He was P13 when he went out, and he was no doubt helped by having this slightly different scenario and being the experienced driver. Although it's interesting to think that Williams had 2 drivers, neither of whom had completed a whole season yet. So, it must have been kind of difficult for them to show the full potential of their car, which in a way kind of makes the P13 that much better and shows.
It does, yeah.
Makes you wonder what Russell might have achieved in the race here if he'd been in the Williams instead. So, but yeah, otherwise a good performance from Latifi, who could have got more and may have even been in the points. We just don't know, but it wasn't to be, sadly. So we end up with a VSC, and a bunch of people pit, understandably, to gain from the slightly more advantageous pit stop. But I think the VSC ends a lot earlier than a lot of people are expecting, and in particular, this hurts Sainz and Ricciardo, who are the second of the 2 to pit. McLaren have a sort of have something of a double stack. But it means that it ends and they actually lose out from it ending at that period of time. And this means that Perez, who has been flying through the field at this point, gets an extra couple of places for free.
Free of
because
charge.
He now doesn't have to take over Sainz and Ricciardo, who are probably 2 of the biggest challenges that he's likely to face. So I don't say that to take anything away from Perez's performance, but again, it's just a case of being able to take your opportunities and having the pace to be in the right place at the right time.
Absolutely.
And that definitely worked for Perez there.
Yeah, Ferrari
It's
had
just a shame.
Had a terrible stop, didn't they, under the virtual safety car? They really struggled with Vettel's front left. It was just abysmal. He was
they
there
need to
for
practice their pit stops at Ferrari.
9 or 10
Absolutely
seconds.
abysmal.
It was awful. And I look back because I watched this race when I got home, and then I made my race notes later on in the day once I'd had a nap after my night shift. So I wanted to enjoy the race, and then I did all my notes. And actually, the VSC ended when Norris was released from the box. So Norris was on his way out. Wasn't quite as hindered as as Carlos was going to be, but still, wasn't ideal. And then Carlos comes in, and the VSC has ended like 3 or 4 seconds before he even gets before he's stopped on the mark. So really, really crucified Carlos Sainz there. I don't think it was a bad call. I think they were well within their rights to go,
Oh yeah,
virtual safety car, it's going to be out for 60 seconds, 120 seconds maybe. Got a couple of minutes of this. I can't remember why. Oh, it was to clear up, obviously, Latifi's stricken car. So, yeah, well within your right to think this is going to be out for a minute or 2. Let's get both cars in on a fresh set of tyres and go to the end of the race. But, just these things happen. It was open and then closed within, 20 seconds. It wasn't open for very long at all.
Yeah, so that kind of really changed the dynamic of the midfield quite a bit. So that was would have been 56 that the VSC
That was lap 56, yeah,
ended?
because lap 57, Sergio Perez takes Lance Stroll and moves into P4.
Yeah.
Crucial move going into the end of this. Well, I say the end of this
Stroll
race.
had a bit of a lock-up, didn't he?
He did,
sort of
yeah.
I think it was a turn 6.
Yes, and Stroll also had a lock-up at the start of the race, didn't he? After the first safety car, he almost went straight into the back of one of the Renaults, I believe.
That's the safety car at the end, just before the restart,
was it?
I think it was.
Okay,
yeah.
we'll get to that then. But one of a couple of lockups was Stroll. Nevertheless, really good race. He's doing quite well. Hovering around the top 5. He's in a chance for the win, which is fantastic. And then we'll move on to lap 61. And unfortunately, and I'm not too surprised. It happens. Jack Aiken spins on the exit of the final corner, and is actually really lucky if you think about it. That he just shears off his front wing and suffers no damage to the rest of his car, or no visible damage to the point where he has to retire. And the pit lane is just a couple of meters across the road. So, he was very unlucky. And like I said, we've mentioned before, fresh into a Formula One car. He's had 2 days practice, the same as Russell. And he's going round. He's not spun. He's not locked up. He's maintaining his pace. He's doing well. He's keeping up with the field within reason, no more than a Williams wouldn't do. and he just has a spin, which we saw. I think, did we see Alex do it in free practice? I think we saw Alex do it in free practice for last week's race, but obviously it's happened before.
It's the same bit of track.
Exactly the same bit of track. And just, I was surprised at how lucky he was. And he just took off his front wing and then obviously drive into the pits. But crucially, there was a front wing left on the track in the racing line. On the racing line, which is more important. Now, the Marshall post was actually quite close. It was almost within reaching distance. You just want to get a little bit of a litter picker and just try and reach. No, I'm joking. It's about six or seven. It looks 6 or 7 meters away from the track. But annoyingly, with this track, and I say annoyingly, but obviously it's provided some great racing. It's a 2.2 mile track with 20 cars go around it, so you don't have a car every 2.5 seconds, which is why the Marshall can't safely retrieve that bit of equipment. And after last week's comments on Marshalls and and retrieving cars or crossing the road, put themselves in danger, I'm not sure they wanted to cause any more issues for the FIA or that marshalling team, so they did the right thing and they left it until it was safe to do so. But that triggered a full safety car.
Yes, we ended up with the first full safety car since obviously we had one right at the beginning, so we got treated to one near the end. That caused the Mercedes team to decide to pit again. Now, I don't know why they did this. They said that it was
I don't know why.
They said it was a safety pit stop. I don't really understand why. They didn't need to. It wasn't necessary at all. They could have just stayed on the hard tyres that they were on. They had the pace. Both cars were pretty comfortable where they were. They just decided that they were going to pit again. So, we should also mention, to be fair to Bottas, before this, about lap 60 odd, Bottas was closing the gap.
He was actually
Russell.
Because
it was
Russell
about 8 odd seconds after he pitted, and it was coming down to about 5 seconds. So he was taking a bit of time out of him, and we were on for a potential final
really good
battle.
Yeah, I think Russell had some deployment issues along the straight, or had some deployment issues, but that only hindered him down the straight. So he was losing like a 10th a lap, but Bottas was obviously putting his right foot down and gunning for him. And like you said, that time went from 8 seconds to, I think it was 5.1 seconds by the time the pit stops were, triggered. And that is a shame because I think we would have seen the best of both drivers actually. If it had to, they went head to head a couple of times this race and would have liked to seen it a couple more times. But let's talk about the pit stops. So lap 63, the full safety car is deployed and Mercedes decide to commit to a double stack. It's not the first time they've done a double stack and it won't be the last time. They usually do this very well indeed. George is the first car in and has a slow pit stop, 5.3 seconds. And when you do a double stack, you almost expect the second car to be the one which is slower because, or slow because obviously it's the second car in. But George has a seamlessly just a slow pit stop and leaves after 5.3 seconds.
Well, that's the way it looks. Yeah, it just looks like a slow stop.
It just looks like a safe and slow pit stop zone, and then pulls out, and then Bottas pulls in behind him. Now Bottas had some issues.
To wait a little bit as well. It wasn't a particularly well executed double stack because Bottas came in and did have to sit for probably about a second or two, so it wasn't all that well executed.
It's just not good for Mercedes, was it? And like you said at the beginning of the podcast, was for a team which thrives on perfection and loves to pride themselves in perfection and every single thing they do, this was just not in what they envisioned this weekend.
It makes it all the more shocking that it would be that bad. It's not a little mistake, is it? It's catastrophic.
Yeah. And back in the day, we expect the same from Ferrari, and now look at now we pass a bad Ferrari pit stop as just a Ferrari pit stop. It's just one of those things. So this is what happens when teams get to the top of the field. You expect more of them, but actually mistakes do happen. Ironically, just before we go on to the shambles, which is this pit stop, the one thing which Mercedes probably wasn't as good as Williams was the pit stop. So Williams is used to like a sub 2 second or 2.1 second pit stop, and Russell's in and out, gone. Just about blinks and he's back on his way. And
that's one thing he doesn't have to worry about.
Exactly. With Mercedes, it's slower. We found one thing which Mercedes is probably worse at than Williams. So, pros and cons. But back to the action. So Bottas pulls into the pits and, like you said, has a little bit of a delay. And seemingly there's an issue with the front left tyre. Now, initially for me, seeing the wheel gunner, he's jostling with the wheel gun. It's clearly jammed up or something isn't working well, and he can't get that tyre on. And then it just gets a little bit confusing. They just flap so much. It's really strange to see. Anyway,
And the brakes are burning, and there's like the
brakes are on
flame coming out of the
fire.
discs.
It's like this is just a mess, and people are like shouting at each other, or you can't hear them, but you can see people like verbally talking to each other. And some wheels have got mediums on, some wheels have got hards on. Anyway, decision was made, took the mediums off, and the hards went back on. And I thought that's strange. That's really strange. And then Bottas pulls out. I thought, blimey, what's going on here? And it became apparent about 30 seconds later when Russell was then asked to come back into the pits because there was a mismatch of tyre sets on his vehicle. So, Alex, you did a really good job explaining this earlier. So talk us through, the legality and what went wrong with why he had to come back in and how it could have been avoided potentially.
So what seemed to happen was that Mercedes themselves, we know that they have a sort of no blame culture. Perhaps another team might have said somebody did something wrong and this happened. But Mercedes said that there was some kind of technical error or technical issue. Whether or not that's true, I don't really know. But apparently something happened where a message was supposed to be relayed to the garage to tell them to get such and such a tyres ready because of the car that they thought was going to come in first, or what car they could expect first. And they presumably, there was some kind of error where I think what happened was Russell talked over the message that they were supposed to hear, but it wasn't his fault. It was maybe somebody pressed the wrong button, or they have all these buttons that they have to press for the radio. But anyway, what happened is that they missed or misheard the message about the car that was coming in first, and ended up putting the front tires were Bottas's tires, and the rear tires, I believe, were the correct tires. So,
it's just
and that's against the rules. You can only put tires that's why they have the tires that are designated for a specific car, because obviously they may have a different tire pressure. A driver may request to have a slightly different setup for their tires, and they are considered part of the car. And I believe that, it comes under all the Parc Ferme regulations. So in the same way that you can't change your rear wing, or you can't, change your roll bar or something, your anti-roll bar, that's considered part of the setup. So they breached the regulations there and had to change it. Now, as we've mentioned, that's not covered by the 3-lap grace period that we would normally expect from somebody accidentally mixing compounds, which is, say, you had softs on the rear and mediums on the front or something. It was a pretty unprecedented situation, and it meant that they had to immediately come back in and switch it so they had the correct tyres. Now, in Bottas's case, it meant that Russell has just gone out with his tyres. So their only option was to just put his old tyres back on. That was the only thing they could do, other than just sit in there and go, somebody go and get some tyres, please. We need some tyres over here.
Tyres,
they weren't prepared to do that again.
There was a brilliant picture of the Ferrari mechanics. Obviously, they pull their wheel gun tethers out the way, don't they, as respect for the teams coming in or coming out of the pits. They pull their, the wheel gunner tethers and the stanchions out the way. And I just see 2 Ferrari mechanics with grins on their face, looking at the Mercedes. And I think, you know what? I wonder
somebody
what was
other than us
head.
for a change.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, maybe that Vettel pit stops won't go noticed now because Mercedes have messed up so bad. But yeah, do continue.
So Bottas has to go out on the same old tyres, and he has to do another 30 laps on these hards. Russell, he ends up getting to pit. Obviously, he has to pit again.
Yep.
He has to pit, and they obviously decide to keep Bottas out instead of pitting him again. But Russell has no choice. He has to come in, comes out again on softs, I believe.
Yeah.
And ends up with a significant tyre advantage, which is good. Not so good for Bottas, who at the time of coming out might have been okay, but later on in the race is really going to suffer. The tyre deg at Bahrain is high enough as it is.
Oh, it really is.
It's just a really, really, a terrible position of victimhood for Bottas once again. Completely out of his control. But team sport.
It is.
That's the nature of team sports.
You win and lose together. There we go. Yeah. There we go. But with the safety car been and done, all the pit stops done to the best of their ability, the safety car comes in and a restart is underway on lap 68. And just to clarify, Bottas is now in P4 and Russell's back in P5. So at this point in the race, I'm feeling like, that's a shame. That's a massive shame. But if anything's going to go wrong, it's going to be that. Let's see what he can do. It's going to be Bottas versus like Russell again. This should be quite interesting. Russell's had good pace. We'll see what happens.
It didn't look like it was going to put too much of a spanner in the works of the two cars that were clearly going to have the best pace. And
no, exactly.
Now one of them had a significant tyre advantage. And
he did say over the radio, I think Bono was on the radio saying you should have significant tyre advantage, and he said, and Russell came back saying, "I really hope so." Which is very British. It was very British. I really hope so. Or I bloody hope so. Which is fantastic. But yeah, Perez takes off and gets another fantastic start. He's now been in the lead of this race for quite a while. Not as much as Russell, who's now got the third highest laps led this year, which is fantastic for a Williams driver. Not too bad at all. But yeah, Russell takes off and makes a 1.2 second lead in half a lap. Other than that, the first lap was pretty uneventful. Everyone stayed in their order. There was no DRS, so there was no like aided overtakes or anything like that. Russell looks at turn one for an overtake, but Russell looks at Bottas going into turn one and decides the better of it. Seemingly gets a better exit out of turn 2 and 3, and is now alongside going into turn 4. But Bottas gets a little bit out of shape going into turn 4, and heads into sector 2 ahead of George. But George is now right up on the gearbox, and then we see what I call probably one of the best overtakes, well, arguably the best overtake of the race. And I'm going to put it up there. It's one of the best of the year, because there's not a place you would expect people to overtake going through sector 2. I saw it in Formula 2 quite a bit, and I was like, that's interesting, but they've got quite smaller cars, so maybe that's why they're achieving this. But Bottas on the racing line, and George decides to send it up the inside. They're going side by side through this S section, and then turn 7 is a 90 degree left, and then turn 8 is about 100 degree right with quite a wide curb on the exit. And Russell sends it on the inside of turn 7 and then gets fantastic traction out of turn 8 and has done Bottas. Now, I know he's on fresher tyres, but Bottas, I feel like should have defended a little bit better than that. Probably the only place you could defend in that track and almost not guarantee an overtake, and he let the rookie come through.
Yeah, it shows a real commitment for Russell, who could have easily just waited for a straight and would have been able to just do it.
We're not
short
of them, are we? Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, we're not short of these straights. There's 3 of them on this track. And I said to my other half, I was like, this is Russell really trying to make a point. He is gunning. He's trying to get this contract. He's basically saying, this is what I can do in your car. This is what I can do after 2 days of practice. I'm taking it away from one of your lead drivers. And instead of waiting 10 seconds and overtaking on the straight, I'm going to do it in a arguably not dangerous part of the track, but a harder part of the track. And I thought, yes, this is what I want to see. This is great racing. It was so good. But yeah, I'll be quiet now. Take it away. Sorry.
Well, don't be completely quiet. I mean, that won't make for much of a podcast with 2 of us. But yeah, it was a really good overtake. It showed his commitment, and it showed that his mindset as a racer. It's hard to imagine Bottas making a move like that if the roles were reversed.
I don't know.
Tyre advantage or no, it's just Bottas. You feel like he would have just waited for the straight. He would have been like, let's just keep it tidy. I'm easily going to get him on the straight, and let's go round, and there we go.
Bottas is a good driver, but he's a safe driver. He's a very safe overtaker. He won't take any risks.
He's got quite a conservative attitude towards his racing, doesn't he?
And we've seen that on going back to 2018 or 2019, where we've seen it on like penultimate laps, and Bottas is he going to make the move? Oh no, he's alongside, but he just backs out at the last minute because he just doesn't want to cause an accident. Whereas other drivers are, lick the stamp and send it. That's what Ricciardo says. But it's just different drivers have different styles of driving, and we've seen the polar opposite between the 2 Mercedes drivers this week.
Yeah, so fantastic move from Russell there, and he didn't stop there, did he? He didn't stop there at all.
Not at all.
That's lap 71. Lap 72, he's up to P3. Lap 73, he's up to P2. He's absolutely flying. He's going for it. He's not going to have any of this. He's going to show his worth and all the rest of it. Bottas, on the other hand, his tyres are falling apart. Sainz gets past him. Ricciardo gets past him. Albon gets past him. He's obviously just got no tyres left. I don't really think that's Bottas's fault at all. Just the closing stages. He's already done loads of laps on those hards. He probably also, I don't know, maybe he also lost his head a little bit as that was happening, because it's going to be pretty difficult to maintain focus when you're up and coming driver teammate in his first race is flying around past you, and you've got these other drivers that are now threatening you. You got no rear tires left.
Absolutely,
So
and I want to talk
that's
about
probably part of it.
Bottas's rear tyres, because at the end of the race there was a good graphic about how long many drivers had spent on their tyres, but Perez had spent longer. Ocon had spent longer on these tyres. The cars leading this track, going faster in lesser powerful cars, were had the same tyre on and had them for longer laps.
That's true, but they may also have been driving quite differently under the understanding of the type of race they were driving.
Absolutely.
Like if you know you're doing a one-stopper, you're going to race a bit differently to if you're like, oh, well, I'm on hards, but
these are hard tyres. They're designed to go the majority of the race, and he had done 14 laps on them when he came out of the pits. I've heard the team radio between Russell and Bono, and Russell said, how many laps have the cars in front of me got on their tyres? And it was Bottas used hards 14 laps. They're not used tyres, and they're not tyres at 10% like Amazon Workspace suggests. They're relatively fresh tyres. They should be still in their 80% range, if you ask me. Hard tyres are meant to last, more than half a race. And at this point, we're on lap 70 when Russell overtakes Bottas with only 14 laps to go. So I just don't buy this. My tyres are gone. Obviously, he may have been struggling, but the tyre life should have been there, without a doubt.
Yeah, so it's because they pitted 63. So yeah, it's about 10 laps later, in which case he would have been on those tyres for, I think he would have been on the tyres for about 30 laps by that point. They would have been about 30 laps old, I think, or thereabouts. They were, as Martin Brundle wonderfully put it, of an unknown vintage, his tyres. So maybe it's not entirely certain, but
Very true.
Yeah,
but we'll move on.
I think it's a mixture of, you're right. Perhaps he should have been doing a lot better on those tyres compared to some. Maybe, he also just lost his head a little bit and wasn't able to have the same level of focus, and it just started to fall apart for him a little bit. But yeah, moving on, we have a couple of other instances I've already mentioned. We had other cars that were going past in this period of the race. It's a shame. Obviously, we'll come up to the inevitable puncture, but it's kind of a shame that we didn't get to see a Perez Russell battle after all. It would have been exciting to see him
we
do
were
it.
robbed
Perez
off
reckoned he had the pace, didn't he? He reckoned that he had the pace to keep him behind,
and so
which
did
is
Russell,
bold.
to be fair. So did Russell. Both, Russell turned around and said, I had the pace, I had the capacity, I had the tyres, and Perez also said that he reserved that pace, he reserved that tyre life. So we were robbed of some really good battles towards the end of this race, whether that would have been Bottas and Russell or Russell and Perez, or it was fantastic at the end of the race. Don't get me wrong, the podium was amazing, but it could have been so different. But that's racing.
It would have been one hell of a battle.
That's racing, and exactly. We might be Grace next week with the same drivers in the same cars. You never know. But as it stands,
lap 79 then.
Lap 79. Okay. George gets a radio message from Pete Bonington. Puncher left rear, wasn't it? Puncher left rear. And then I like to hear it. What I really found funny was this is a genuine puncher. So I think what I read between that is initially they see the pressures drop on the sensors. Obviously, each tire's got their PSI sensors, and they can see how much pressure is in the tires. So I reckon if sensor's gone off, we've lost a bit of pressure, and then they check. So I reckon a radio message came in beforehand saying potential left rear puncher, and then it was left rear puncher, left rear puncher. This is a genuine puncher. Box, and my heart. This is straight after a safety car. We're only 10 laps after a safety car, so the whole field is bunched up again. So a 23-second stop is done to absolutely crucify Russell's race. And I don't know what else to say about it apart from George pits on lap 79 and comes out in P15. What he does over the next 6 laps is nothing short of brilliant. Never gave up. The mentality was there, but it's such a shame. Such a shame.
It's funny that at the same time, David Croft at the same time on the commentary is going, "God, Bottas just can't get any luck, can he?" And they're going, "No, that's Bono, mate. That's Bono. That's Russell's race engineer."
Yeah.
But yeah, so just the worst luck. I mean, is it the way that he's driving? Is it because of how hard he's driving? We know that they were told to stay off the curbs and that they could they were warning him about the impact to the suspension, and maybe it's something to do with the way that he's driving. It's kind of hard to say for certain.
Potentially. I think there was also talk of some debris going into turn 2, like a tiny little debris, which he may have run over. Yeah, I'm sure we get a good Mercedes debrief every Wednesday or Thursday, and I'm sure this will be one of the many topics they talk about. And they're always open, so if you don't watch those, they're about 10, 15 minutes long. I suggest you do because it's a really good insight to see how the team operates. And they don't hide behind curtains. They turn around and say, "Yeah, we messed up," just like Toto did on Sky Sports, but a little bit more abruptly.
Yeah. But it's gutting. It's
So
gutting for George, who now
was-
finds himself
yeah.
in P15 and
without points.
Yeah, without points.
He's gone
even his fastest lap will mean nothing in P15.
Yeah, he's gone from being first place or potentially regaining first place, fighting for a podium position with fastest lap, being on the podium for the first time, to doing what he does every week and being in P15 without a point. And it's just heartbreaking. But like I said, the next couple of laps were absolutely fantastic. And I've only made notes on Russell here. At this point, I was a little bit upset when I was watching this for the second time again. I almost wanted to pause it when Russell came out in P5 and overtook Bottas and was going for the win, and I just didn't want to watch the race anymore. But interestingly, I've got some movements here. So Russell came out in P15 on lap 79, lap 80, Russell's P14, Bottas is still in P8, lap 82, Russell's in P13, Bottas in P8, lap 83, Russell takes P12, Bottas is still in P8. You can see a theme here. Lap 84, Russell takes P11. Bottas is still in the same position. And lap 85, Norris takes P9, moving past Gasly. And then lap 86, Russell takes P10. And then on the final lap, Russell takes his good friend Norris into P8. And so obviously he secures that fastest lap point as well. And at this point, he's right behind Bottas. So Bottas hasn't moved for all these laps. He's just trying to stay stationary. And that Mercedes has fought through the field. Now, I think a conversation, I know this podcast has gone on for a while, but I think a conversation is deserved or, is warranted around. We've talked about how that Mercedes just doesn't do well following cars or doesn't do well in traffic. Does it not?
I said the last time we talked about it.
I've said it as well.
True. I don't think that's true.
Clearly not. It might be depending on the characteristics of the driver or the track itself or the wind direction. We don't know. But Russell made some really good overtakes today. Whether that was fighting back after the botched pit stops or fighting back after his puncture, made some brilliant overtakes. And so that car clearly can overtake. So it puts all those rumors or those the Mercedes, Bottas can't overtake because he's following a car. Puts it all to bed. I'm sorry. That car can overtake. We saw it today on a track where, I don't know what else to say, but that car can overtake, and it was shown today. Did we miss anything else between the lap 79 and lap 86 when I've obviously focused on Russell? I know Norris got overtaken, unfortunately.
Obviously we focused on the big battle there and Russell's heartbreak. I don't think there's a whole lot going on around that period of time. It's just largely the focus on what's going on there. Just to add to that, really, obviously Russell finally ends up in P9 and gets his point. Not just one of them, he ends up with 3 because of his fastest lap as well. 2 for P9 and 1 for the fastest lap. So at least he does end up with some points. He finally gets his points. It wasn't as many as we thought he was going to get.
No, it's not the 25 I was expecting.
There's not much else to say about it really, other than it's a real shame. He was pretty much faultless all weekend. And to think that it was his team that let him down is unthinkable. But it's what happened. That's the nature of a team sport. I'm sure that Mercedes will be and have been very apologetic towards him. I'm sure that they will, as you've mentioned, give us the full debrief. I'm looking forward to that myself. But 9th place or not, the guy has done everything to prove what a talent he is.
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt.
The hype is real. Basically, the hype is real about Russell.
It's not artificial anymore, is it? It's not artificial anymore. It's not necessarily. Oh, will he? Won't he? Will he? He's quite young. He's inexperienced in an F1 car. He's only been in F1 for 2 years. What we've seen today is an application for that car. That is Russell's put down what he can do with 3 days' notice or 3 days in the car. And he's proven that. And I almost think the unfortunate circumstances in which he got in this race almost adds to that application because he didn't give up. He kept on fighting. He kept on fighting to that very last lap and got that P9. Was it P9? Yeah, it was P9. Got P9. So I think that only aids his professionalism. And then the interviews after the race as well, very professional, very, very honest. You know, he mentioned how sometimes teams make mistakes and drivers make mistakes, and he's obviously reflected on his own mistakes this year. And sometimes it's just the other way around. But we live and we learn. So really good performance from Russell this week. I mean, this year as a whole, he's been great, but this week has been fantastic.
A performance as good as any PowerPoint presentation could be.
Indeed. Yeah, that PowerPoint must have been spot on.
Yeah.
But
right, we've talked a lot about Russell.
Yeah, exactly. Let's move on to what actually happened.
Yeah, let's talk about the actual finish of the race here, because of course that incident pretty much just solidified what was the case in the top three, because there wasn't really any signs of anybody exchanging places in those top few positions, so it looked set. And I couldn't quite believe what I was watching. I'm like, unless something happens like what happened last week, which I guess could yet happen, Perez is going to win the race. Perez has gone from dead last on lap 1, and he's going to win the race. I think it's the first time in Formula One history that somebody has been last on lap 1 and won the race. Now, people have overcome greater deficits because there have been more cars on track before, but nonetheless, the title, if you like, of being last on lap 1 to win, I think that belongs to Sergio Perez and Sergio Perez alone.
It's a fantastic achievement. Well deserved, well driven, well maintained.
He's put the work in for sure.
Oh, he's been spot on this year. He's just done everything he possibly can. There's nothing more he could do to ask.
I'm not sure I agree with you on that one. I'm not sure I agree. He's been all year. He's been a little bit. He's been a little bit hot and cold.
The last 2 races, then. You know, going towards the end of the season.
Obviously, there's 2 races where he wasn't there. You know, we can forgive him for that. It's not his fault. But the first, he did have a good recovery drive. I think in Styria, it was definitely one of the Austrian Grand Prix. He had a good recovery, but like the Belgian Grand Prix, he didn't really show himself. The same with Italy, a car with a Mercedes engine. Yeah, it feels like he should have done much better, especially as well as Stroll did. And Stroll was outshining him quite consistently around the middle of the season. And Perez,
I take it back.
Slipping away a little bit. We were talking about it. We were saying like Stroll, wow, he's really come alive. He's making Perez look not nearly as good. But when he got announced that his 3-year contract was ripped up and sorry, don't get any more. We're going to have Vettel instead. He came alive, and we know that he's capable of being a brilliant driver. He's been in this sport a long time, but this season he's been a little bit up and down. So I wouldn't say that he's been amazing all season, but certainly the closing stages this season, he's been immense. So clearly, you tell this guy that his contract's no longer on, and he's going to put in a serious shift for you. And I guess you would, wouldn't you? Yeah. Your future in the sport is at stake. So he's shown absolutely what he's capable of.
He holds the record for the longest amount of races before a race win, with 190 races participated in. And on this 190th, and to think that he may only get 191 races, I'm glad that he's walked away from if he walks away from Formula One this year, that he managed to get the win. It was great. As much as I wanted to see Russell up there, I really did. But to see Perez, Ocon, and Stroll didn't look too pleased with himself, to be honest. And he almost said that in the interviews as well, on the podium interviews. But Perez and Ocon,
I think he knows he probably could have done.
He could have won
better.
Yeah, could have won.
He could have won that race. Yeah,
there was a lot of people who could have won that race. You look at the top 7. Anyone in that could have. Well, actually, no, because the top 9 includes Bottas and Russell as well. So, and Norris and P10. So any one of those could have won that race with the right strategy call. But Ocon and Perez jumping for joy, crying with tears of happiness. It was amazing to see, and a different podium again. Like this year has been fantastic for Formula One. It's just so good.
I was thinking that because you mentioned obviously Perez 190 races before a win. He beat Webber, whose previous record was 130. And I remember when Webber finally got his race win, he said, "Oh, not bad for a second driver." I kind of wish that Perez had said, "Not bad for a sacked driver."
Not bad for a driver that I see next year. And he moves
but
up
yeah,
into,
so
I don't know where he is in the standings, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But
yeah, and also Perez, the first Mexican to win a Formula One race since Pedro Rodriguez in
50
1970
years.
at the Belgian
50
Grand Prix.
years.
So, and he had his flag up there, and he was flying the
He
flag.
did.
Very emotional during the national anthem. So yeah, he's thoroughly put the work in. I don't think anybody can deny him that victory today. He had a massive, massive recovery drive and a little bit of good fortune and being in the right place at the right time, but also
that's
having
racing.
the pace to be in that place at the right time. So, and that's what you got to do. And he has thoroughly, thoroughly earned it by putting the work in. He's had a pretty tough time of it in Formula One overall. He pretty much saved that team with his performances. And he had a rough time of it when he was at McLaren. I believe he moved to Europe on his own when he was younger in order to continue his career. And he basically
fair enough.
he was kind of like alone in Europe in order to continue his career, because that was kind of where the racing largely was. A lot of those countries don't necessarily have as big a racing
of course not.
categories as they do here, just because of the history and the support that happens to be behind it. So he's got quite a tale, and it's fantastic that he managed to finally get his win. And when he was talking about it post-race, he was talking about it as if he kind of knew that was probably it. He'd finally got his win at the end of his career, and that this was a good way to close things out.
We'll find out in a couple of weeks' time. You never know.
We will.
It's I don't know. It could go either way if you ask me. You still think Albon's going to be in there, but I think it could go either way.
Well, I mean, I don't really know what to think. I think Red Bull have made it pretty clear they want Albon to stay if they can. I think they want Albon to give them a reason to stay, because there's lots of things about it that do make sense. Maybe Perez just doesn't factor into their long-term plans, whatever they happen to be. There must be so much information we're not privy to based on these decisions. It's their car. They can put who they want into it, and they have this driver program for a reason. People must pay a lot of money to be part of that driver program, so they intend to uphold it, I guess.
Yeah, they need to make sure it's maintained, and it's a program which is worthwhile. Otherwise, they're discrediting the program itself. But let's not go into too much of the Red Bull seat,
it's hard to really. We can obviously discuss all the possibilities, but we don't really know. Is the short answer? We have no idea until they announce it. So, but suffice to say that we do hope to see Perez in Formula One again, if not next year, then the year after, and because we know that he's a great driver, and finally he's got his win.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Ocon. I'm really, really happy that he managed to get a performance. I think he's had a kind of slightly understated season. He's got a bit of stick for not being as good as he could be. And he has been underwhelming at times. But he's also suffered from 4 DNFs, none of which were his fault. All mechanical issues compared to Ricciardo's 1. And what a tough teammate to have. I mean, Daniel Ricciardo is one hell of a teammate to be faced with. This is a guy who, was able to go toe-to-toe with Max Verstappen in the Red Bull.
Yeah, and came out on top.
Yeah, this is one. I think Verstappen points wise managed to best Ricciardo. I think.
Yeah,
I might be remembering that wrong.
It wasn't like Verstappen dominated. It wasn't like Verstappen dominated every single race. They were giving each other hell. So,
but to come close, to even come close to that guy is tells you how good he is. He's easily one of the best drivers on the grid. So that's a really, really tough teammate to have. And Ocon, to be out for a season and then have to come into a team that really, really wants results and is desperate for some really good results, to finally give him one, it felt like he kind of didn't really receive the praise that he should have got. I mean, Ricciardo got a P3 and everyone was like, "Yes, it's a podium, we've done it." And Ocon gets P2, and like a couple of guys came over to him and it was like, "Well done, mate, good job." Like, come on, where's the love? Like,
where is the love? And that's the driver staying as well. It's not the one who's going to leave you at the end of the year.
Yeah. This is your French driver in the French team, big brand. Like,
this is the dream. This is the dream driver.
I think, to be fair, I think Alan Prost and the guys on the pit wall were pretty happy, but it was just the sight of it. It wasn't quite as immediate.
It's because there was no bet. It's because there wasn't any bet. So there was no tattoo, to come of it
that we know of. Maybe he decided to keep this one secret.
Yeah, maybe because he's lost one already. He thought, I might lose another one. But yeah, fair play to Ocon. Brilliant drive and just well deserved. And another driver on the podium. First podium.
Yeah.
What a drive.
Yeah,
and then
good for Ocon. I'm really happy for him.
Stroll seemed a little bit displeased, like I said in the post-interview race, post-podium interviews. I think he thought he could have done better. A lot of drivers could have done better. A lot of drivers could have been luckier. Perez was quite lucky, but like I don't want to keep on saying that's the name of the game. But you've got to have a luck on your side. Like Russell today, it wasn't on his side. It just happened. So,
as I say, luck is merely probability taken personally. So. I think that when we talk about luck, I think it's just a case of opportunity and being able to take opportunities. But you know, as they say, fortune favors the bold. It's I'm getting all my phrases out here. I want to get as many quotes as Brundle. I want Brundle quotes. It's a matter of having the pace and the understanding and the racecraft and the temperament to be in a position to get those opportunities. So it's a complicated thing to talk about, but I generally think of luck in that way, in it being probability taken personally.
Fair enough.
But what a final podium! Who would have expected that?
You would have never guessed that going into this race.
We've got a podium filled with drivers who have never won a race, and it's the second time that's happened this season.
Yeah.
So, and again, we already mentioned Racing Point go from double DNF to finally getting their race win and a double podium. Yeah, absolutely
that's
incredible.
Crazy. Does a lot for the constructors' standings, doesn't it?
Certainly does.
Right, Alex. This is going to be a tough one this week. Driver of the day. Who do you think?
Oh, have I got to go first?
You do. I mean, I can go first. I usually let you go first because I wasn't prepared. But I'm prepared this week.
Yeah, tables have turned because I'm a little bit on the fence on this one. I think I know, but I'll let you go first. You go first.
Okay. Well, it may not come as a surprise to anyone who's listened to this podcast who follows me on Twitter. I'm going to give driver of the day to George Russell. I'm going to give you some reasons, but you're probably all aware of them. The guy got called up on Wednesday. He did a couple of practice sessions, qualified 0.02 of a second behind his teammate who's been in the car for 5 years, and then dominates the majority of the race, is struck in by bad luck, doesn't give up the first time, potentially looks like he's going to get the race win or at least a podium, then gets bundled down with a puncture, drops down to P15, still manages to secure points with 7 laps remaining, puts it on P9 with the fastest lap, and just never gave up. I mean, for a young driver who's inexperienced in Formula One, who managed to pull off such a substantial weekend, driver of the day.
I see. Well, yeah, I'm a little bit on the fence between Russell and Perez.
It is a tough one
because it's one hell of a recovery drive from Perez, but there's a little bit of taking the opportunity as well. I think I'll go with Russell as well.
Oh, we agree.
But with the determination that he showed after all the difficulties that he had, I think perhaps the most impressive thing was the fact that he was so concerned with the process. When you heard him on the radio, he was just very professional, and he just was able to take advantage of the crew that he had around him, especially Bono, the race engineer. He was like, "Give me all the information. When should I use DAS? What do I need to do here?" He didn't get flustered by the spotlight. I was kind of tempted by Perez just because his recovery drive was so mega when so many other drivers seemed to be struggling, and just seemed to be stuck in various positions, but not Perez. I think he had he's got an old engine or something as well.
He does.
I don't think he was able to put a new engine in after what happened last time. So it's not like he was, some drivers like Lando, for example, who had a brand new engine. This is a guy who just, had what he had and put it to maximum use. And I think that racing point car is maybe even better than the Red Bull in terms of its drivability and its potential. I mean, I think that the upper potential of the Red Bull is potentially really good, but we know that it's really tough to drive. So actually unleashing that potential may be really difficult.
It's tough to achieve that potential, isn't it? Whereas the Racing Point is probably a little bit lower on the potential scale, but easier to achieve once everything's working well. Yeah.
So, I think I agree though. Yeah, George Russell, the way that he's managed to get into that car and produce that performance, not just on Sunday, but on Friday and Saturday too, is amazing.
Not only do we agree, but then the hype is real. You're not wrong, and I want him to see him in the car next week, but not at the deficit of Hamilton feeling ill. So I'll take whatever happens. But we agree with each other, and we agree with the general public, which I think is the first time this has happened in 2020, especially on the podcast. Yeah, it hasn't happened before, because usually...
But we're supposed to be horribly contrarian.
Oh, I know, but usually the driver of the day on the public is a popularity contest, for example. But this week
Hamilton never gets it for some reason.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. But this week it may have still been a popularity contest, but it was well deserved as well, without a doubt. Right,
championship standings then.
Championship standings. What do you want to start with? Constructor or driver?
Let's go constructors, seeing as I'm reminded of the question that we got from Brian at the beginning about the third place, because obviously Racing Point have gone from getting no points to getting a pretty sizable chunk. So
absolutely, and it's mad how it turns around. So we can just we can brush past the 540 points Mercedes, AMG, Petronas have scored this year, which is
whatever.
Yeah, we don't need to see that. The real racing... No, I'm joking. Congratulations, Mercedes, but you've won it a couple of races ago, so we're just going to brush past that. Red Bull Racing, 282 points, obviously picking up a handful of points due to Alex's lower finishing position, and Max did not finishing, which is just unfortunate. But it looks like they were always going to score secure P2 in the championship, so they were under no great threat. The real interesting stuff...
I think they have. I think it's already...
if it has, then
nothing
I haven't
that can
seen
happen
them.
now. So. I think it was the last race. I think it was in Bahrain.
Potentially, yeah, probably.
Yeah, their double podium, I think, cemented it for them.
Yeah, you're not wrong. The real interesting stuff is 3, 4, and 5. I'm not even going to include 6th place Ferrari here, because I think it's too little too late. It really is too little too late. We've only run one race to go now. It's quite easy to do the maths, but with
that
Racing
AlphaTauri double podium that we're going to see in the next race is really going to...
It's done a mess up Ferrari's standings, isn't it? But with Racing Point on 194 points and McLaren on 184 points, there's 10 points between them. And then 12 points below McLaren is Renault. And I don't want to say, not much will change, but, Racing Point secured 40 plus points this week in the constructor standings. So let's not take everything out of the equation just yet. But back to the question, who do you think's going to finish third? Yeah, I'd like to say McLaren. It's going to be close. It's going to be one of those races where I'm constantly trying to do the maths, and hopefully they display it on the screen as well. They show us what's going on in the constructors and make it a little bit more interesting for the race itself. But pretty close still for 3rd, 4th, and 5th place, Alex.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what kind of race we're going to see next week, or this week, I should say, given that it is this week now.
Yes.
We've spoken before how we don't particularly love the Abu Dhabi circuit, so hopefully we'll be able to see some exciting racing for that. As to whether or not it will be which one of these three it will be, obviously I'd like it to be McLaren. I think Racing Point probably, just by virtue of being in front in third right now, have got the best chance. But you never know. We might see a sudden Renault flourish to steal it at the last. It's just too close to call. It's just far too close to call.
If one car DNFs, it's a game changer. If Racing Point suffer an engine failure, that changes the game for McLaren. But equally, if McLaren and Racing Point suffer an engine failure, then that puts Renault right in the mix. If they get 2 cars in the top 10, you just don't know what's going to happen. So it's all to play for. Ferrari is sat on 131 points with AlphaTauri on 103, Alfa Romeo on 8, Haas, Ferrari on 3, and then Williams, Mercedes on 0, which is a shame. I really expected them to pick up a point this year. They had it so close so many times in P11s, both drivers, to be fair, have got close to the points, and Abu Dhabi isn't one of those tracks which complements that Williams car at all. So I don't want to say never say never, but I can't see it happening next week.
And it's not representative of the season they've had because it is so much more improved than it was last year, despite the fact they managed to squeeze 1 point. So
absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, despite them sitting at the bottom, it's not all doom and gloom. They still have vastly improved, and they find themselves largely, to be fair, thanks to Russell's performances, fighting a bit closer, a bit further away from the bottom of the pack, which is always good.
Yeah.
Driver standings. Then obviously nothing much to say about the top because Hamilton's already champion. So we do have some interest though with the Bottas Verstappen fight with Bottas's DNF. I figured that the gap would obviously be much bigger. I mean, we could have seen a Bottas win, and to just cement that was no longer became an insurmountable task. But with Bottas only finishing 8th, it means that it's still all to play for.
Still 16 points between them. Absolutely. All that takes is one car to DNF. That takes Bottas to DNF next week, and Max to do quite well, and we could be in for a bit of a late second place. You never know. Which is why
the same is also true for 4th.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, take it away, Alex.
Perez 125, Ricciardo 112. With both of them showing their potential for podium finishes. Who knows what could happen there. And then we're down 98 for Leclerc in 6th, 97 for Sainz in 7th, 93 for Albon in 8th, 87 for Norris in 9th. I mean, it's so close between 12th and 6th. There's 38 points in it. So obviously not enough to necessarily change that much, but it could move around an awful lot in the next race yet.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like Sainz might get the win out of the inter-team rivalry out of Norris and Sainz because they finished quite far apart this week, so there's 10 points in between them now. So I think Sainz might pick that up next week. It's been a great battle throughout the whole year with them, and hopefully we'll continue to see it next week. Who knows if Norris gets a really good qualifying and a decent race, it could be a point or two away from each other. You don't know, but I'm sure it won't bother them too much. They're what I call one of those perfect unities or the perfect teams. Like they seem to get on so well, they respect each other's driving style, and they're always trying to help each other out. So the McLaren boys quite close to each other. Albon with 93 points, which is just it's just under 100 away from his teammate, which is it isn't great. And Bottas is exactly the same. He's under 100. He's over 100 points below Hamilton, and Hamilton's not participated this race. So some teammates are, you got clear number 1 and number 2 drivers, or the better driver in the pack. Whereas further down the field, you got cars which are quite close to each other.
I wonder how much closer Perez would be if he'd been in for those other 2 races.
That's a good point actually, because he's not too. He's only 60 odd points behind.
He wouldn't be ahead. He couldn't be ahead,
but he'll be close.
But he would be much closer. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Last thing to say about the drivers, though, the big one is obviously Russell.
Oh, P18.
He's not last anymore.
Fantastic.
He's not last.
Yeah. Now got 23 drivers on the driver standings.
Yeah.
So he's not even like, if there was 20 drivers, he's in 18th. So it's not like he's just scored a couple of, I know he's only scored a couple of points, but he's 18th out of 23 drivers, which is not bad at all. And if he's in that Mercedes next week, I really hope he is. I keep on saying next week. It's not. It's this week. He scores, 20 points in the Mercedes? That might put him up to above Hulkenberg, which would be, pretty fantastic. That
remains to be seen.
Remains to be seen, and we'll find out in 7 days' time what happens.
Poor blimey, I don't know about you, Shane, but that was an effort in the best possible way. That was a real effort. I feel as drained after this as I did after the after the race itself.
We have to relive it in step by step. That heartbreaking moment when Russell, got called into the pits, messed up, and then the puncture. You have to relive it in almost in slow motion and break it down into detail. But that's what we do. It's what we love.
It's what we do to ourselves every week. But thank you very much for joining us. If you made it this far, then thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who sent in our questions. Please keep them coming. If you enjoyed what you heard or watched, if you're on YouTube, then you can subscribe to us and leave us a comment and a like would be very, very much appreciated. It helps out the channel. And if you're listening to us on your podcast provider, then give us a rating and a review. Again, it really, really is very encouraging for us to know that people are listening and to know what you think. And if you have any, obviously, if you have any constructive criticism, then please give it as well, because we want this to be as good as it can be, given our fairly limited resources. Obviously, we're not a big publication or anything like that, so we're doing the best that we can, and we rely on you for that kind of feedback, because I guess we get a bit wrapped up in what we do. So fresh pair of ears on it is always welcome if you have any constructive criticism. You can follow us and contact us at RacePerMinute on Twitter, or get in touch via email, info@raceperminute.com. We do mention this every week, and we do still want it to happen. If you want to send us a question or a comment, not by text but via audio or video, you can do that too, and we'll gladly feature it on the podcast. We already had Dave Doherty do that earlier on, where he sent in a video which we featured. So consider doing that too if you're brave enough to be seen on camera or your voice to be heard. And lastly, if you really like what we do, the most dedicated way to support us is to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/raceperminute. And for as little as £1, you can show your support for us. We will include your name on our list of supporters on the website, and you can get your name at the start of every video. You can join our Discord. You can get merchandise. You can come and watch the races with us. Come and race with us online on F1 2020. There's lots to be had. So check out patreon.com/raceperminute, which just leaves me to say thanks again for joining us. We will see you next time for our very last post-race discussion of the season, but by no means our last video of the year, because there's still plenty more to come from Race Per Minute.
Absolutely.
Thanks very much for joining us again, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.